I think inflation is going to be more volatile going forward. I think for pre-pandemic, there was a long period where inflation was just fairly stable. It was just sort of flat.
Right.
And going forward, I think, given what we saw in Baltimore, given what we're seeing in the Red Sea, I think that there is going to be more volatility going forward. Consumers are still spending, so that's a good indicator that they do feel that
credit card debt is huge.
Yes, well, their balance sheets are actually okay.
I think the most important one for us, if you're thinking about real estate, is jobs. So that's why I went right to jobs. It's the only thing that creates future apartment demand that we know of. So when you're looking at the economy in Arizona today, I think there's a lot of tailwind from a manufacturing perspective. We talked about that in some previous podcasts. I think we're kind of in the middle of that upswing or tailwind.
I like to take this opportunity in thanking our very generous sponsor, Cox Communications, for today's episode. Cox Communications and Mark Taylor Residential, not only on the development side, but also on the management side, have been partners over the past several decades, and we cannot achieve the resident experience we have with our residents without Cox Communications and their help. Please enjoy this episode, and if you haven't used Cox Communications, please give them an opportunity. Thank you to everyone at the Cox family. It's your usual suspects, John Carlson, Adam Greco, Mark Taylor Residential, Multifamily Forward, and I've been looking forward to this episode, John, because we're talking everything the economy, and we have no other than Abby Rosenbaum from Oxford Economics, who can't say thank you enough, and flew in all the way from Boston, right? And I know before you even start talking, there's going to be a lot of people watching asking, where is the accent? Do you have park the car in the garage? Don't have that at all?
I don't.
You don't have that at all?
I don't. And I'm actually from Maine, and I don't have that accent either.
Wow.
So I can't help you with any of the New England accents. I apologize.
Well, we are so grateful. And I know you're out here for a conference. What conference is it?
It was the NACREIF conference.
And you're going to have to expand on that a little bit.
It's a gathering of a lot of sort of the research-minded folks in the real estate industry.
Right up your alley.
Right up
your alley. Mm-hmm. And I know we have your partner in crime who is off camera right now, Nadine, who's from New York, and I'm looking right at you, even though we can't see you. But thank you again for making the trip, both of you. This is a real pleasure for us.
We're happy to be here.
So at Mark Taylor, we focus a lot on data collection, of course. Mm-hmm. And you guys have been just instrumental in the amount of information that you provide. In fact, I was just telling Nadine before we started the recording here is that every day throughout the day, I have all my settings set up inside my account, making sure I have all the reports that I want to read that are specific to our industry and even outside the industry, which of course affect everything within the economy, right? Tell us a little bit about Oxford Economics, if you don't mind.
No, sure. I mean, I can speak to it from my side, and I can certainly turn it over to Nadine should I miss anything. But,
there we go.
I think really we're a global forecasting shop. And so we provide not only macro forecasts, but we have tourism forecasts. We have our real estate forecasts.
Yes.
We're an all-encompassing, like I said, global forecasting shop. So,
well, the amount of information, if you haven't signed up or subscribed to Oxford Economics, make sure you do after this episode. Sound good?
That sounds great.
John, before we kind of pick the brain of Abby, because I have a feeling there's going to be a plethora of information that's just going to be spewed out, and I'm going to have a lot of questions afterwards.
Absolutely.
Let's get your take. I mean, because in fact, you lead every single month a meeting for our company for macroeconomics.
Yes.
Near and dear to your heart, and you speak so passionately about it, intelligently, of course. Give us the current state of the economy right now.
You want me to give the current state?
Well, from just as far as Arizona, exactly. We're going to bring her in, but you speak so much to this, and we track it so much. I just felt it was important. Sure. Let's just kind of get the ball rolling.
Throw me a curveball.
Yeah, we'll see if you're accurate once we bring. Yeah,
I'll run with it, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, good.
I think first and foremost, there was a major job revision, which happens every year.
Good.
Q1.
A good one.
Yes. So we were at essentially 42.5 year over year, non-seasonally adjusted in terms of growth, which was the lowest since 2009. That was adjusted significantly to over 70,000, so 72,800 jobs, which actually ties better to our actual demand numbers, our calculations historically,
Right.
from a multifamily demand perspective. So it felt like it was more in tune with what we've seen historically outside of the pandemic. So that was a good thing to see, and it certainly met our demand and absorption numbers. So I think that gives me, a lot more confidence about 2024. We've talked a lot about soft landing. I hate saying that, but so far so okay.
Okay.
I'll say it that way.
Good. I like that one.
So we know that, and we're going to talk about some indicators that we track closely. We track 16 macroeconomic indicators,
Yep.
monthly, quarterly, annually. And I think the most important one for us, if you're thinking about real estate, is jobs. So that's why I went right to jobs. It's the only thing that creates future apartment demand that we know of. So when you're looking at the economy in Arizona today, I think there's a lot of tailwind from a manufacturing perspective. We've talked about that in some previous podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're kind of in the middle of that upswing or tailwind. Most of it's construction today. So you think about the barbell effect of Intel and TSMC, and I just think the suppliers behind them, the ancillary jobs it will create from that manufacturing demand is significant. Biden was here, I believe, last week when I was stuck in traffic all day. Going to Intel to announce the CHIPS Act and the distribution to Intel. So there's a lot of momentum for Phoenix, and I think that matters. Consumer sentiment matters. I think, you talked about tourism before off camera. I think a lot of people want to be in Phoenix. There's just a lot of significant
It's a
demand.
pretty fun place.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So
it's a pretty fun place.
I feel good about it, but there's a lot of underlying issues, which we'll get into, I think. So I'll
Great.
leave it at that.
Well, great. You mentioned Biden. I live in Chandler, which is where the Intel plant is.
Mhm.
Every off ramp going down the highway was blocked off by Secret Service, and
Safety first.
It was something else. Just trying to get back home. But anyways, Abby, John mentioned indicators.
Yes.
So I'm going to pose this. This will be your first question to throw at you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So what are some of the indicators that you track that we need to track on gauging the health of our economy?
Sure. So we at Oxford have generated a business cycle indicator, which enables us to sort of see where the economy is. We've combined several metrics from the National Bureau of Economic Research. I believe I have that acronym correct.
Nice.
Well done.
And so we combine all of those metrics and we sort of see where things are. The zero line being where if you go below it, we're in a recession. If you're above it, we're doing okay. And we are currently above it. So I think that's a good signal. We have been we're getting closer to that zero mark, but we're not there yet. So the economy is on solid footing from what we can see. Another metric that we look at, and this sort of goes to what you were talking about with jobs, is we look at initial claims. And so you can sort of see where things are starting to get fractured when you look at the initial claims for insurance. And so again, it's important. And I think you mentioned this earlier that, to sort of look at all of the metrics as a whole picture. It isn't just one metric here and there. It's all of them working together. And so I think with our business cycle indicator, we're able to sort of combine all of those things, with the exception of GDP. We do not include GDP simply because it's quarterly. And so the frequency is not quick enough for us to sort of use that in that indicator, but that provides us with a good overall picture of where the U.S. is going and where it is.
Can I ask you a question to follow up on that? So
Please.
When was the last time your cycle indicator was below that threshold for a recession?
So I believe that only 2 times in the history of the indicator, we have gone below the zero mark and we have not been in a recession. But every other time we have been in a recession. So it was during the pandemic, I believe. So again, it's a really strong indicator when we're talking about a serious amount of history. And it provides us with a really strong idea of where things are.
All right. Follow up.
Sure.
On recession. Has the definition of recession changed, or is it just more of a political move?
I mean, I don't believe that the definition itself has changed.
Okay.
The thing about recessions is that there could be an instance where we could be in a rolling recession. That there may not be the the meeting of the exact definition, but there are, sort of certain pockets of weakness in the economy.
Right.
But as far as I know, the definition has not changed.
Good. I like to hear that. I like to hear that.
I concur.
Yes. Good. So we talk about strategic planning, following interest rates as far as just one indicator. So what are some other key considerations when interpreting economic data and trends for strategic planning?
So yeah, I think sitting from where I am on the real estate side, and again, I touched on this earlier, that certainly it is, it's sort of viewing these indicators in the context of the broader economy, thinking about it, at the metro level, as we've talked about, but thinking about it in the U.S. So I think that, looking at where inflation is, where the consumer is, and recognizing that, specifically within real estate, population jobs do drive apartments, but they also drive retail. So I think that there is the connectivity. So recognizing where the individual trends are going, but also seeing it in the broader context of where things are.
Great. John, I'm going to kind of pose that same to you, just more specific to multifamily.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, I'll go with more specific indicators. So I think for multifamily real estate, it's interest rates always matter, right?
Sure.
So, interest rates go down, transaction volume goes up, cap rate compresses, all of those things happen. I think when you look at wage inflation, another I, that matters. Can our residents afford to live in Class A? We focus a lot on Class A.
Sure.
So that's a big piece of that equation, which ties closely to jobs. I think about demographics. Today you think about the millennials. The most millennials are age 32 today. Yeah. You think about the band of renters on average, 28 to 38, typical range. That bodes well for us from a demographic perspective. That worked against us in 2005, 6, 7, 8. So I think, the challenges looking ahead will involve mostly employment here and what that trend looks like. And inflation, like you have to factor in what inflation means. From our perspective, it's great if you own real estate, assuming your rate is not going to change soon because you have a capital event with your terms expiring on your loan. So it could be positive. Also, you have to think about single family in terms of permits and also construction on both sides, single family and multifamily. Yeah. So certainly supply matters, interest rates matter, all of those things collectively. So there's some concerns about some of those things. Inflation for me is one of I think it's ultra sticky. And I have lots of reasons for that. And I think it's going to be a potential calamity down the road, and it has to be addressed. So, we keep talking about the Fed cutting. But all things considering, when you track the data, it's real sticky. So I'm concerned about that, especially on the service side.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And certainly we have seen some of that stickiness, particularly on the services side. And the shelter inflation component, which is a good metric for rent growth, has been sticky. And we have seen indications from many sources that rents have come down. So that's part of why we expect disinflation this year. That shelter component will sort of filter through. There is that lag. And so that will sort of bring inflation down. But really, it's the services part that is really keeping inflation on the sticky side. The goods portion has pretty much come down to what we would expect it to. So the shelter component and then also real wage growth, we expect to decelerate this year. And that will help bring inflation down fairly close to target.
I wonder how the consumer sentiment, which we know tracks closely to our.
I read that all the time out of your reports.
Yes, certainly.
So how does that factor in? Because the economy is powered by consumers. It's 70% of our GDP. What do you think about that side of the consumer sentiment piece?
So, I think that from some of the latest readings that that I've tracked is that, consumers are still spending. Mm-hmm. So that's a good indicator that they do feel that
credit card debt is huge.
Yes. Well, their balance sheets are actually okay.
Okay, good.
Their balance sheets are okay. They're in a good position. And that's pretty impressive given the sort of tightening of the credit conditions that we saw.
Right.
And that was a concern, but the balance sheet seemed to be okay and consumers are spending. We did see a little bit of a slowdown at the beginning of the year, but again, I think a slowdown was expected. I think a lot of what what we're talking about here is sort of the expectations, the confidence, investor confidence, consumer confidence. So I think that, certainly there are concerns about inflation staying elevated, but I think those have been tempered recently. And I think, again, the consumer has been quite strong in really bolstering a lot.
I think one thing with consumer debt and I'll say credit cards specifically.
Sure.
I think it depends on the narrative you're trying to push forward, depending if you're a bear or bull.
Sure.
So I just think, almost everyone I know, close circle of friends, uses their credit card for things to get points. Bonvoy,
it's always about
Southwest
reward.
Airlines, whatever it is, right?
Absolutely.
And then they pay off that balance, before the end of the month.
Sure.
So, of course that looks like this each month, but they're not accounting for the actual payoff.
Yeah.
Now there's, of course, consumers that are paying high interest rates and not paying everything off.
Of course.
But I just know I typically never use my debit card. And I think that's a fundamental change in the economy from 10 years ago.
Yeah. And I do feel like part of what supported a lot of the consumer spending was the driving down of the savings that occurred and were collected during the pandemic. So that was part of that momentum as well. So the savings rate has come down significantly. So there isn't that sort of that padding there for consumers to lean on should they need it.
Let's stay on inflation since we're on this topic now.
Sure.
So we've seen inflation drop down a little bit.
Yes.
Rising interest rates, wanting to make sure our unemployment rate is, and it's scary to say, but of course, trying to get the unemployment rate a little bit higher. And the general public really doesn't see that as a good thing, right? Of course. Are there any other factors that drive inflation?
So you mean currently or going forward?
Going forward.
So really, like I mentioned, I think the services part of things really just coming out of the pandemic and a lot of the spending on services, and that really drove inflation up. And like I said, we've seen a good disinflation in the good side of things. And we really need to see that services component come down. But we've seen some seasonality at the beginning of the year, and usually. And I think that spooked some people.
Yeah.
But, typically from what we've seen historically, the January CPI has been higher. So there is some noise. There is some volatility in the CPI. But again, I think that consistently we expect over the course of the year for there to be disinflation, which is good news. And again, it sort of follows what we expect to see from the Fed as well.
In talking about interest rates, of course, the Fed releasing that there will be some decreases in the rate. Is there anything that is driving them? Any prospects for the Fed to do that in 2024?
So I think that, I think really where the Fed sits right now, I think they're in a tricky position, sort of trying to sort of manage the confidence piece of things. We do expect that rates will start to be cut in June. Even though there is talk of people thinking that rates may not be cut this year. And really where we stand in terms of the rate cuts is that it's going to be a slow cut. It's going to be cuts, but it's going to be 75 basis points this year, which isn't a tremendous cut. But it's still a cut. And I think it's going to give investors confidence. And I think consumers confidence that there is sort of the downward trajectory in rates. But really, I think that they were sort of trying to manage the situation when they mentioned that there were going to be cuts. And again, everything that we see signals that they should be cutting now, if not, within the year. So again, there is those signals that we're looking at, and everything points to cuts. So.
That's great. So we focus a lot, and John and I specifically, along with several other members of our team, we really talk about legislation here locally, not just locally, but also nationwide. And the two-word phrase that I'm going to share that neither one of us want to actually say out loud is rent control.
Sure.
So I have a question. This is a very detailed question, so I'm going to read verbatim to make sure I don't mess this one up. So in light of the extensive body of economic research suggesting that rent control may lead to unintended consequences such as diminished housing quality and shortages. It remains a recurrent theme in political discussions and policy proposals. As an economist, which you are, of course, why do you think rent control continues to be a popular political talking point?
So I'll speak to it from, I don't know if this is necessarily the political side of things, but I think affordability has been a real concern. Rents are, and I certainly don't have to tell you all this, but, rents are not very far from their peak. They are still hovering at an accelerated rate. So I think that is sort of driving a lot of the affordability, the cost burden aspect of this. And I think that's what's driving the rent control conversation. Historically, it does disincentivize developers to produce housing. And so that causes housing shortages, which drives up rents. So it could happen that way.
Right.
We are seeing examples, I believe, in Oregon, where there is sort of a delay in the rent control that is in place over the next 5 years for new developments. So it does sort of enable there to be not an immediate rent control for those new developments, but it gets phased in over the next 5 years. So that could be a possible way to sort of help mitigate any sort of extremism from the developer's side. But again, historically, I think that's where, from an economic standpoint, that's where we see the impact occurring is on the supply side.
What if we, and I know getting to the levels that we are with rent, housing just in general, right? If we limited the amount of, excuse me for saying it this way, bureaucratic red tape that developers have to jump through just to get a property approved to be developed, would that not help rent levels instead of placing rent control?
I mean, I don't know if I can make a good, solid judgment on that question, but I think, really what's been impeding a lot of the construction is, so from a single family side, certainly there has been a lot of people staying in their homes, and that's been driving apartment demand for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mortgage rates, many of these mortgages that are used here in the U.S. are fixed rates. They used to be floating a while ago. And so people with their fixed rates stayed in their homes, and that caused the supply to be constrained. There hasn't been a lot of new supply. Construction costs have been elevated. So I think that that's a piece of the puzzle here too, is that, once we start to see things sort of work through the economy, we see that disinflation, that hopefully the construction costs will come down, and perhaps that will spur some more housing. But we are seeing supply in certain markets. Sitting here in Phoenix, we were talking about the construction component and how there is building going on, and we are seeing that impact rents. So there are pockets of supply out there, but certainly from, where I sit in Boston, we are in need of more rental housing. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. No, you did. Absolutely. No, okay. I appreciate it. What do you see as predictions for the global economy for the rest of this year, 24?
So similar to what we see for the U.S. So I think we're expecting around a 2.5% increase in GDP globally. And that's similar to what we're expecting for the U.S. We're expecting 2.4%. So again, it's a similar story. Moderate growth, solid moderate growth for global, for the global piece. There are things that we are tracking, certainly the geopolitical tensions that are going on in the Red Sea. That's something that has impacted our inflation forecast slightly, has not changed it that dramatically, but it is something that we're factoring into our forecast now. But again, I think from where we sit right now, things are fairly solid from a global standpoint.
Any influences that you foresee changing this at all?
I mean, certainly there could be, I think really just going back quickly to our inflation conversation, and this hopefully applies, I think inflation is going to be more volatile going forward. I think for pre-pandemic, there was a long period where inflation was just fairly stable. It was just sort of flat.
Right.
And going forward, I think, given what we saw in Baltimore, given what we're seeing in the Red Sea, I think that there is going to be more volatility going forward. And I think, consumers and just U.S., the people in the U.S. are going to have to get more comfortable with inflation being a little bit more volatile going forward. So that said, there certainly are risks to our forecasts, and those are just a couple of the things that I mentioned. But I think recognizing that it's not going to be like it was pre-pandemic, just in sort of that steady state.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Let's talk technology. You're a tech buff. I know you are. I remember when the iPhone and Samsung came out, and I didn't know how to work the phone very well. I would call John
from his landline.
Hey, from my landline. Hey, can you walk me through these steps? I want to get my settings correct. So we're talking the technological advancements that are happening is just mind-boggling to me.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got AI, which I've seen the benefits.
Mm-hmm.
I also always constantly revert back to the Terminator movie. What was the name of the company? Skynet. And it bringing down the machines are going to take over.
I don't know.
I'm throwing you off here.
I'm not a Terminator
I like
guy.
this.
Yeah,
oh man, it was so just AI in itself,
Sure.
artificial intelligence, blockchain, DeFi. How do you see this shaping the economic landscape moving forward?
Sure. So I can speak to the economic landscape, but I can also speak to the real estate landscape as well. We did a study on generative AI recently, just sort of see at the employment level what the sector or what the influence might be or the impact might be. And then we also sort of took it down to the metro level as well. So I can give a quick overview.
No, you don't have to be quick.
So in general, I think it's going to be a boost to productivity. So we're expecting it to, I believe, add about 3% to GDP over the next 10 years. Again, there's going to be the ramp up. It's not going to be immediate. So certainly thinking about it in terms of a 10-year time horizon is really important for AI. But, really where we're seeing the disruption coming is the office using sectors. So, and that's a tough, you can tell I'm a little bit upset about saying that because it's going to be a tough ride for the office sector. And, it's already been through some structural shifts that it's managing. So I certainly don't want to give it more of a pain point, but, it is something that we did determine that those office using sectors are the ones that are going to be most disrupted. On the other end of the spectrum, the industrial sector is most likely going to be least disrupted, and the retail sector sort of in the middle. So again, when you're thinking about space demand,
right,
office is going to get hit the hardest.
Yeah.
Retail, it's a little bit of an up in the air thing. How does that affect space demand? I don't know. It could be more automation. We'll see how that sort of plays out. And then again, like I said, the industrial sector is not as impacted, but really it's an office using employment story.
John, we talk about AI and just how our industry, multifamily, is essentially behind the curve when it comes to the technology advances that we've seen. What's your take? Does this help multifamily?
I think it influences every sector, right? So it's the fourth industrial revolution. I don't know that we've even tapped into it, right?
Yeah,
it's just been born, really.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you follow AI experts, and I certainly listen to a lot of podcasts. You follow AI leader from Facebook, Lacour. He, what they're talking about, where we're at today is amazing,
mm-hmm.
but what we're going to do
mm-hmm.
and what they think is possible is remarkable. So. I'd up Abby's number, even though she has the data. I think it'll be more dramatic at every level, and we don't even know what that means yet.
Yeah.
And I just think, we used to think about robotics and automation, but now
mm-hmm.
you're talking about generative, you're talking about just a different level. And,
mm-hmm.
It's going to be more significant than we think. What we did in the pandemic in terms of, kind of reshifting the mindset of multifamily
mm-hmm.
was a lot of consumer-driven activity. Like, I'm okay to be self-served.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need someone to hold my hand and tour me around a unit. I think it exposed us from a multifamily sector. We knew we were behind,
mm-hmm.
But it gave us an opportunity to say, okay, let's really look at the data. Let's back up,
mm-hmm.
because you can get so in your bubble. No, we don't do those things.
Right.
So, when you're looking at how other sectors produce output through technology, I think we're behind, but I think we're catching up rapidly.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Abby, I didn't expect you to be doom and gloom right? Thank you, by the way. I mean, I say that jokingly, but being able to have you here and just get all of your expertise. I mean, forecasting, predicting, it's not where I excel. That's why I turn to you and all the reports that you guys kick out. So greatly appreciate it.
Oh, I was happy to
We
be here.
have a tradition.
Before we go to tradition,
Please.
I have one more question.
Please. I like it.
I feel like we can't talk about the economy if we don't mention debt.
Okay.
What I'm referring to is federal, not Adam's, credit cards. So
We can pay those off, though.
I think we just passed 34 trillion. I think we're at 34 and change.
Sure.
Change being billions of dollars.
Sure.
So we're adding $1 trillion every 100 days ish. We just tipped over the $1 trillion mark on interest rates for the Fed debt. So I think it's 1.1. It's just not you can't sustain that long term. So you factor in trying to sell treasuries, right? So, if you start to pull rates back and those treasuries drop below 5%, 4%, we're already losing some steam internationally from people wanting to buy treasuries. So where do you see this playing out? I know that everyone just likes to kick the can down the road, but it's doing this. And, and now we just surpassed our entire national defense fund, right? What we budget for each year or spend. Yeah. So it really upsets me to think about the irresponsible nature of our debt. I just want your thoughts on it.
No, and it's something that we just talked about at the conference actually yesterday. So it's certainly on the mind of our clients and some of the people at the conference. So really the expectation is that it's going to become a problem, say, in the next 5 to 10 years. So not this president, but the next president is going to have to deal with it. It's going to be, I know there is that sort of the kicking of the can, like you said, that has been discussed as being a problem, but we see it as being a point at which it's going to be a problem in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's something that we certainly are tracking, and we're hearing from clients that it is a concern, but it's not immediate, but it is in the near future.
So if you think about it, I just listened to Ron Paul's podcast on Tucker Carlson, and he talked about him thinking about the national debt since the mid 60s, right? And he said it's never changed. Like, politicians never think about wanting to pay it down, right? There's never a conversation. No one says, let's pay our debt down. So what's the solve? It's inflation, right? So that's why I think inflation will be ultra sticky longer term. Every president has to get elected, right? Politicians have to get elected. Do they want to stop the give outs, the pandering to their voters? That's my biggest concern. So feels like 5 to 10 years. We keep saying that. We'll see. I don't know. But GDP really has to grow, right? I mean, we're over 100% GDP now. So
yes,
that's
exactly. And that's where we're sort of gauging that breaking point.
You look at all, Greece was over 200%. Look back historically. I think we can't look away from what's happened because it could be us.
Absolutely. And like I said, I think that our clients sort of talking about it means it's top of mind for a lot of people, and it's an important thing to be discussing. But again, I think when we talk about inflation, and I was talking about the volatility that, when I think about inflation and when we think about inflation long term, we're talking about 2.5%. We're not talking about getting back down to where things were. So again, I think putting things in context of where we were compared to where we are going is important. It sort of goes back to the question that we talked about, that not only thinking about things in terms of where various metrics are, but sort of looking at the past. And that sounds to me like such a forecaster response, but I think it's really important. And I do that from a real estate standpoint all the time, sort of thinking about, 2019, 2015 to 2019, the normal times, particularly for the apartment sector. 2021 and 2022 are not sort of the quote unquote normal for the apartment sector. So I think it's really important to put things into context and sort of think about it that way.
I like it. Well, thank you. So we're going to close out with what we're grateful for, our little tradition that we have. Doesn't have to be anything specific to the economy. It can be in your personal life. It can be hanging out with Nadine on a trip, whatever it may be. I'm not answering for you, of course. We're just plugging you one more time.
Yes.
What are you grateful for today?
I'm grateful for the people who lift me up in my life.
There you go. I love that. Any shout out do you want to give? I'm putting you on the spot now, aren't I? That's okay. I'm only teasing.
No, I think it's all encompassing. It's work colleagues. It's my husband. It's my family. There are so many people in my life that it's hard to name them all.
It is. Oh, that's great though. John?
Well, as a lifelong learner, I'm grateful for the Oxford relationship and grateful to meet you guys finally in person.
Yes.
And it's always interesting to me to learn from others, especially experts in their field, which is why we're here.
Absolutely.
So I just appreciate you coming in today and spending time with us.
Oh, thank you.
I want to say, I've said this many times before, but I'm so grateful for the team that I have the privilege of leading, co-leading alongside our producer and director extraordinaire, Miss Allison Salit. Future going to be married here soon at the end of this year. So I wanted to just say hello to the entire team. First off, Allie, you're awesome. Thank you so much. I learn from you every single day. Josh Salas, Christian Trujillo, Izaria Veasley, we call her Z. We have Samuel Ebersol, we call him Sammy the Hammer. And then closing out, Mr. Michael Mancuso, who, of course, if you've seen some of the previous episodes, he was one of our first episodes. He has many names, Cuso, Cusimano, and Couscous. So just want to say thank you to the entire team. But Abby, we can't share how grateful we are that you guys came in.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We love, as John was saying, we love the relationship, the partnership.
I'm glad.
And let me just say this, if you have not subscribed yet to Oxford Economics, now is the perfect time to do that. While you're doing that, also make sure you subscribe to Multifamily Metrics, our monthly and quarterly reporting. It will educate, it'll kind of guide you through what we're going to be seeing in the next several months, along with the information that we gather from Oxford Economics. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Abby, John, Adam, Multifamily Forward, presented by Mark Taylor Residential.